So that was the Bow song right there, which was first recorded at the school in South Africa where where the school kids are singing the song in the open courtyard and they're recording it. And this is just a sample that I dubbed off of YouTube. And this is it's sung in the Zulu language, Xhosa, Xhosa. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But I wanted since you mentioned that song and its origins and how similar it is to Hebrew, I want to play this song for you. This song here comes out of Israel from the prophetic priesthood, and it's a singing of First Chronicles 11:17. I might have that wrong. Might be 17:11. But it's from the African Hebrew Israelite community in Israel, and this is called Asa's Prayers, right? It's taken directly from a quotation in the Bible. And I want you to hear how African this sounds. Prophetic priesthood.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, crazy that sounds, and when you say it with an African impression, right?
Mm-hmm.
They talk about how in Hebrew and in languages other than English, where you can say the same statement, but depending on how you inflect on that statement, it determines whether it's a statement or a question.
Okay.
The same is true of how you accentuate that language can make it sound African or more Africanized or more anglicized.
Mm.
So when we hear Hebrew or when you hear about Arabic or one of these languages on the news, they're going to always have somebody speaking that is European or that is not African because they don't want to give up that identity. You understand? And this is very important that we understand that because in 1953, when Israel and Egypt were at war with each other, the president of Egypt, his name was Hasdi. I can't remember, Ibn Hasdi. I got to think of his name. I'll look it up. And he was saying that he cannot appreciate the Jews as they currently are because they left Israel black and returned white. Well, a few years later, there was the 6 Day War where Egypt tried to invade Israel and they lost. And the president Hasdi was Ibn Nezer, was his name, Ibn Nezer, Hasdi Ibn Nezer. He lost the war and was dethroned from presidency. And the next king that came after him made a pact with Israel. And the reason why Israel and Egypt made a pact with each other, you see, and people wonder why nowadays in 2024, why Egypt is not helping out the Palestinians when the Palestinians share a border with Israel and Egypt, right? Their border is Israel and Egypt and the Mediterranean. Why isn't Egypt helping the Palestinians? Because Egypt and Israel have a pact. And here's what the pact dictates. Moses Moses and the Israelites lived in Egypt for all those years when Egypt was African and when the Israelites were African. If the Hebrews were European, as popular history tells us, how could European Hebrews hide in a black Egypt? But now Egypt is not black. Egypt is invaded. Egypt is occupied by invaders called Ottoman Turks. And so the pact that Egypt and Israel made is this. The president of Israel told the new president that succeeded Ibn Nezer, he said this: if you spill the beans on Israel being black, then we're going to spill the beans on Egypt being black as well. And there's so much, think about how much money we send Israel every year because of the Holocaust, because of all of the things that we send Israel money for. Well, guess what? The second most money-hungry exploit in the Middle East is the study of Egyptology. Consider how many universities, consider how many scholarship bodies, how many grant programs, how many researchers, how many movies, how many people go into Egypt to identify, or to do research, or to unveil Egyptology and Cleopatra and all these other pharaohs and Amenhotep and all these people. Guess what? If we reveal that these people are actually of African descent and not the Ottoman Turks, they lose out on all that money. So they are trying to hold on to this identity of being Egyptian just as strong as the Jews are holding on to this identity of the Hebrews being European. And they have created this conspiracy. This is totally off subject of the subject for today, but it is prevalent to Black history. Kevin Hart was supposed to be going into the Cairo to do a comedy act. And he was on a show with a guy, and they were talking about his upcoming performances in Cairo. He had like 12 or 13 concert dates in Cairo. And the guy asked him, he says, what are you looking forward to when you go to Cairo? He goes, oh man, I've always heard about Egypt and the cradle of civilization, all these things, all the pharaohs, et cetera, and the blackness of it. I just want to go to Egypt and I want to explore my black roots. The government of Egypt got on the international stage a few days later and said, we are canceling Kevin Hart's concert, canceling his performances in Egypt because he made remarks that don't sit well with the Egyptian community about the ancient Egyptians being black. They are holding on to that identity fiercely, to the point that when you look at movies in Hollywood like The Mummy and The Mummy Returns and The King of Egypt or The Scorpion King, they purposefully cast people from, if you look at the casting call, they have people in there from Venezuela, from South Africa, like the Trek Boers, the Afrikaan, the Dutch people. They purposefully cast Europeans and people that are not African to play the Egyptians because they are holding on to that identity of Egyptian as fiercely as the Jews are holding on to this identity of being Hebrews. It's a conspiracy.
Yes, indeed.
So we have to know that that's what's going on in Egypt. Okay, we have to know that that's going on, and that's it's partly why they don't want those Palestinians coming out of the West Bank and Gaza Strip coming into Egypt, because Egypt has been bent over a barrel by Israel, and that's just the facts, you know. But I digress on that. That's not the point. We're going to be in that region tonight talking, about what it is we're talking about, but that is not the subject of tonight's lesson. I just wanted to throw that out there. Real quickly, Yahweh, I highlighted it for you. Yahweh Ein Imka La Azor, right? Bain Rav Le'ain Koach Azreinu Yahweh Eloheinu Ki Alecha Nishanu, right? And then he said, Uvshinka Banu Al Hi Hamon Hazeh Yahweh Eloheinu Ata Al Izor Imka Enosh, right? And what's the basic thing is, Lord, it is nothing with thee to help, whether by many or with them that have no power. Help us, O Lord, right? Israel, Itzor, help us, O Lord, our God, for we rest on thee, and in thy name we go against this multitude. O Lord, thou art our God, let not man prevail against thee. And that's what this song was. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
All right. So let's go ahead and get this underway. I'm going to start from there, but we're going to go back to our PowerPoint. And we're going to start here. Let me make this into an animation from current slide. All right. Let's talk about this now. All right. First, I want to do what we do in normal fashion is I want to raise the arc. Let me go back one more time and make sure I have it. I want to raise the arc first, which is what we normally do. Coming out of Numbers 10, whenever the children of Israel went into battle, they would invoke the power of the Creator for protection and for guidance, and that was how they were able to conquer a lot of their enemies in those days. And we invoke that same spirit in these days for protection and for guidance. So if you will, bear with me as we go over the raising of the ark. Going with your spirits. Kuma Yahuwah, Beafusu Evecha, Ganusu Misanecha, Mipanecha. Kuma Yahuwah, Beafusu Evecha, Ganusu Misanecha, Mipanecha. And in English, I'm going to read it. It says, rise up, O Lord. Kuma, right? To take action, not just to stand up, but to take action on our behalf. Rise up, O Lord, and let thine enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee from before your face. Misanecha mi panecha. Pane is the face. Let those that hate thee flee from before your face, or flee from before your presence. That was the battle cry that the Hebrews would cry in battle, going into battle. So, going back to my PowerPoint slide now, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who took the time to come onto the call. And of course, we are going to have this recording available to anyone who was not able to get on the call tonight. I know it's a Friday and it's not easy for everyone to come onto the call. So I do appreciate those that are able to come. And if you can't stay for the whole time, I understand that as well. We have a few slides to go over. I don't anticipate it taking time that I have allotted for it, but I do like to leave the end of the class open to questions. If you have any questions. Special shout outs. We have a special guest. She might not think she's a special guest, but she's special to me. McCall, and that's Dr. Carolyn Benjamin. She's a member of the African Union 6th Region, global representative on the call today. Dr. Carolyn, how you doing tonight?
I'm excited. I'm blessed to be here. Thank you for having me, Noble Yokanan. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Also, I have some regulars on here. I call them my faithful few, Coach Nilo and Tamara, and and if I'm missing somebody, let's see, uh, what's her name? I can't. I'm sorry. I'm terrible with names.
Burdell.
Burdell, yeah. I'm a school teacher, so I'm terrible with names. All
That's
right. I call everybody. I have 3 guys in my class named Juan, and I call them 1, 2, 3, and they know their names. So I'm terrible with names. But we are celebrating African history and Black excellence, African excellence. Every day is Black history. Every day is African history. And this month is a special lectureship series where we are going over some little known African facts or little known facts about Africa and African people. And we want to try to connect some of those obscure dots because so many of our people learn history starting with slavery. And how can you expect a people with no understanding of self-respect, how can you expect those people to have self-respect or respect others? And you start from something as low and as degrading and dehumanizing as slavery. And that's exactly what it was. And we had to start calling it what it was. It was a process of dehumanization because you don't treat human beings that way without first diminishing their status. That goes into why they call us 3/5 human, why they try to say we come from monkeys, or why they call us monkeys, why everything Black is negative and everything white is positive. There is a brainwashing that has to happen in order for us to accept that we are slaves or that we're Negro or that we're just Black or just American, because we are bigger than that. And slavery was not a part of our history. Slavery interrupted our history. And we have to make sure we reiterate that every chance we get. Don't let it go without being said that slavery is not our history, but slavery interrupted our history. Or as I said in a meeting before, we are not the descendants of Africa. We are not people of African descent. We are people of African ascent because we're no longer going downward. We're rising up.
Okay.
Some of the sponsors of or contributing bodies that have been supporting me in this cause are as follows. We have the Nyambani Foundation. Nyambani is a Swahili word which means home. Not like your house, but like what makes a house a home. So we have the Nyambani Foundation, which focuses on sustainable agriculture, African history, and building homes and housing infrastructure on the continent. We're actually working on a project now to build roads in Africa. I have a little experiment, a science experiment that we're working on to see if this road idea will work in parts of Nairobi. And it's crazy. You don't even need to go out to the wooded areas or the rural areas. You can do this right in the city because there are so many roads in the city of Nairobi that need help as far as infrastructure. So we're going to be putting on one of these projects, and I hope to maybe have one of these things, like a working model of these things when I go to Kenya in July of this year. So we'll see. Also a big sponsor, I don't want to say sponsor, but also a big uh, interest in this project is the African Union Six Region Global, to which I myself and Dr. Carolyn are part of, and I have shared the word with the members of the African Union Region Six, which represents all people of African ascent in the diaspora, and so if we might get some of those ambassadors and people on the call here, and just say welcome to you all as well. Also, I mentioned last week, we have the Hebrew Israelites of Greater Houston on the call. I can't show you right now because it's been cut off by the bottom of my screen, but you might see it on your screen. Hebrew Israelites of Greater Houston. It's another one of the sponsors for this presentation. Hopefully I'm not missing anybody. If I'm missing you, then it's not because you're not important, it's just because I'm human, right? Bear with me. But also, I'd like to thank all of you for being a part of this as well, because I can't do it without you all. You know, the creator doesn't judge you on your audience; he judges you on your actions. But it sure is nice to have a lot of people in the audience, you know. So, but whether with few or many, we still have the work to do, and so I will be sharing this as a YouTube video once we finish. So let's go ahead and get started. If there are no questions or comments, anyone? Okay. So week we last week we talked about the name or the term Africa, and we broke down a lot of different etymologies or a lot of different word origins or trails of the word Africa and where it comes from. And what I hope I shared with you was that the term Africa comes from the Semitic word Ephraim, right? Ephraim. And the roots of the word is all there. The the Fe, right? The F, the R, and the T, right? Afer, Afri, right? Ephraim, Africa, Ophraim, Ophran, all of those words are synonymous with each other. And I'll go back just a little bit to see. We talked about how the Romans use these Latin suffixes like ka or Inus or us, Africanus, Africa, right? But all of that comes from the Hebrew word Ephraim. And we talked about how in the Bible, God talks to Abraham and gives Abraham this covenant that your descendants will be, you be the father of many nations, and your descendants will be innumerable. And we talked about how that covenant or that promise that God gave to Abraham was passed down to Isaac. Isaac passed it down to Jacob. Jacob passed it down to Joseph. And from Joseph, it passed down to Ephraim. And from Ephraim is where this covenant or this promise came into fulfillment. And so a lot of the Bantu and African American ascendants in the world today come from this nation of Ephraim, which means multiple fruits or fruitful. And it was in him that these 10,000s of people and nations came about. That is why Joseph was given the coat of many colors, That's why Joseph was given the prophecy of the grains of wheat that bowed down to him and the stars that came down and worshiped before him. All of these things are synonymous. Even the messianic language of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with what? Fish and loaves of bread or wheat, right? Goes into the language of the covenant or the promise given to Abraham that was fulfilled in Ephraim. So tonight, what we're going to do is, because we oftentimes start African American history with slavery, we clearly understand that we had to have come from somewhere prior to slavery. We weren't just created from a primordial soup in 1619 and then we just came into being or materialized. We had to have come from somewhere. And the common thread is that we came from Africa. Well, that being partially true, some of us were already here in the Americas before the Europeans started to bring slaves. I'm sorry, before the Europeans started to bring people across the water.
Okay.
You know, I have to correct myself because you hear it in history, oh, they got slaves from Africa. No, they didn't. They got doctors and philosophers and painters and fathers and mothers and children from Africa and made them slaves. They weren't slaves before they came and got them. The making of a slave was a process that happened from that ship. They didn't go to Africa to find slaves. They went to Africa to find people to make into slaves. And that slavery process was what we talked about, the dehumanization of the people. So this segment of the race, this is the relay. This segment of the relay is called a Millennium of Moorish Heroes. A Millennium of Moorish Heroes. So first thing we have to determine is, who are the Moors? Who are the Moors? Wish I could move this thing. Do I know how to move this thing? I'd rather have it up there. That's fine. Okay. Who are the Moors? It says here, the Moors have been a subject of historical fascination and debate for centuries. Why are people always fighting over the color or the race? See, we live in a world that has become fascinated by racial lines, and we should not allow that to define all of our research, whether it's historical or epistemological research. But we have to know the weaponry of our enemy in order to combat it. And so while I hate to delve on race and linger on race, I still have to know the weaponry of my enemy. And so we find that a lot of the things in history that are significant or that are meaningful have been whitened. They have taken the things that were contributions to the world by African or by people of African descent, and they have made those people Europeanized. Even Muhammad Ali said, in 100 years, I'll be a white man. They'll make me a white man. So we have to be very careful. Once we understand that things have been whitewashed or whitened, iconoclasted, we have to be very careful to not just paint the white face black, but to also put these African people in their proper context. Because see, that's what happens when the first thing we do when we learn about white Jesus or they whiten Jesus, they put a black man in whiteface, then we turn around and try to put a white man in blackface. So we can't do that. rather than play the same trick they played. We have to stop playing the tricks and look at the historical root. And that was really the essence of why I decided to learn Hebrew, was because I wanted to put these things back in their original context and not just blackwash white lies. Is that all right?
King.
It says, Moors have been a subject of historical fascination and debate for centuries as a group of people who dominated various parts of Europe, particularly the Iberian Peninsula, between the 8th and 7th and 15th centuries. This is the 1490s. The 15th century is the 1400s. That was a very hard concept to understand. The 1700s to the 1400s. Their influence on the region's culture, science, and architecture remains evident today. That is one of the reasons why nobody wants to accept the true color of the Moors, right? That is why they don't want to. European culture, it has been so influenced by the Moors that they will not relinquish their stance that the Moors were not European, or well, they weren't white, but they weren't black either. They were this color, they were that color, right? They're so empowered and emboldened by racial definitions that they don't want to acknowledge how the Moors actually looked. And on the flip side, we can get so excitable or ferocious in our quest to re-identify with Africanness and African things that we will do the same thing they did, which is the problem. We will try and make every Moor African when the truth of the matter is not all of the Moors were African.
Okay.
Okay? The same way in America, not all Americans are the same color, but it is a composite of different people from different cultures that have all come together under this title of American, right? The same is true of Rome, right? Ancient Rome, during the days of the Colosseum, and Rome, to be Roman was not just one people. Rome consisted of people of multiple ethnicities: African, Hebrew, Persian, Greek, and natural Gentiles, or natural Europeans. Greece also consisted of people of multiple ethnic backgrounds. And I want to show you this real quick, if I can. We're going to go to not Esdras. We're going to go to Maccabees, which is part of the apocryphal text, which was taken out of the scriptures, but that's okay. Right here in the first book of Maccabees, in the first chapter of First Maccabees, it says here, moreover, the king Antiochus, right? Moreover, the king Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom, that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. And so all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. And it goes on to talk about different things that happened that the people, namely the Israelites, did under Antiochus Epiphanes, right? Which is just me showing you that the Greeks that you read about when you read in, like, for instance, the New Testament, when you read in the New Testament about these Greeks, the word for Greek in the actual Greek language is not Greek, but Hellene, right? These Hellenes were people of different cultures and nationalities that had accepted the Greek citizenship, and they were, or if you will, they were Hellenized, or they were they had accepted Hellenization, and so they are called Hellenes. And when you read the New Testament without first reading the book of First Maccabees, you would think that these Greeks are just natural Greeks, when in reality, these Greeks are a composite of people from different cultures. But in the context of the New Testament, the writer is talking specifically about Greek-speaking Hebrews.
Mhm.
And that's a big difference. That puts the message of Yeshua or Jesus and the message of Paul into a different context when he says, I am the apostle to the Gentiles. Yeah, which Gentiles are you talking about? Are you talking about natural Gentiles, or are you talking about Hebrews who had accepted the Gentilic identifier called Hellenization? He also says that these people, these Hellenes, these Greek-speaking Hebrews, have been called uncircumcision by that which was circumcised. Why did the Hebrews, who were the only people at the time that practiced circumcision, why did these Hebrews call these Greek-speaking Hebrews uncircumcised?
Mm.
And we can find that out right here. Everyone should leave his laws. And so the heathen agreed. It says, and many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, which is Hellenization, and sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. For the king has sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and to the cities of Yehuda that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the temple, etc., etc., etc. Let's jump down here, verse 48. That they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanliness and profanation, to the end that they might forget the laws and change all the ordinances. So, and of course, anyone who wouldn't do it would die, right? And it says, in the same manner, he wrote to his whole kingdom and appointed overseers over the people, over all the people, commanding the cities of Yehuda to sacrifice city by city, right? And many of the people were gathered unto them, to wit, everyone forsook the law, and they also committed evils in the land. And so, just to show you that a lot of the people that were accepting or embracing Hellenization were Hebrews, and they stopped circumcising their children. And so by the time the New Testament comes along and these Hebrews were writing the Gospels, these Hebrews who had been absorbed from the Greek Empire to the Roman Empire, now all of a sudden they are called uncircumcision by those who are circumcised. Anybody have any questions about that?
No.
Galatians 3:28, it says, there is neither Jew nor Greek, right? So if we look at this word in the Hebrew, blow it out, it says here, Hellene. There is neither, right? Here's the word Yehudo, Yehudos, right? Talked about how the Greeks, how the Romans had these suffixes or plural. There's that suffix right there, Yehudos,
Okay.
or Greeks. And look at the word for Greeks, Hellenes. It wasn't saying Greeks, it was saying Greek-speaking Hebrews. Greek-speaking Hebrews.
Helene or Helen?
So yeah, so the word is Hellene, right? Let me show you. Word is Hellene, but this is if you know about the like the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, right? You have in Greek, you have alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon. So remember the Hebrew, Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, K, which is an H sound. But
All right.
in the Greek, it was alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon. So that E is carrying that H sound.
Mm.
That's why it's called Elenos, Hellenes. These were people that were, it says, either Greek by nationality, whether a native of mainland Greece or of the Greek islands or colonies. In a wider sense, the name embraces all nations, not Jews, that made the language, customs, and the learning of Greeks their own. So this is including people that were not Greek, but accepted or embraced the Greek religion, which was called Hellenization.
Mm-hmm.
So in the context of the scriptures, the context of the Bible, this is talking about Hebrews who spoke Greek and not actual Greeks or Roman Gentiles or Europeans. All right, let's move on here. Unless you have some more questions, I don't mind the questions.
No, hold on.
Let there be light. So if you understand the timeline of the Roman Empire, around 300 AD, much closely close to the time of the Council of Nicaea, 300 AD, 400 AD, the Roman Empire in the West collapsed. And all you had was the Roman Empire in the East. And I might have that backwards. But anyway, because you had the Roman Empire started to fall apart. And as they were moving from their Latin culture to the Byzantium Empire, and everybody was being Christianized, the Roman Empire resisted Christianization. Very unlike how the Greeks all seemed to embrace Hellenization, the Roman Empire did not so readily accept Christianization. And the empire split, and one of those empires went on to become later known as the Byzantine Empire, and the other part collapsed. And when that part of the Roman Empire collapsed, remember I told you that the Roman Empire was not just European, it was a mixture of dozens, perhaps even hundreds of different tribes of people. The Gauls and Germanic tribes, you had Persians, you had Visigoths, Ostrogoths, you had Celtic people, you had North Africans, you had Egyptians, you had Hebrews, Carthaginians, you had Phoenicians, you had Franks and Turks and Spaniards, Andalusians. You had all kinds of people that have been part of the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Empire showed its first signs of instability, what happened? Those tribes saw the exposed neck and they went for the jugular, right?
Mm.
And they started to go to war with each other over the territories that the Roman Empire was losing influence over.
Mm.
And this, of course, led to what we know as the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages happened directly as a result of Rome's instability,
Okay.
because Rome had a chokehold on the entire Mediterranean. So it said the first civilized Europeans were the Greeks, who first encountered Black Africans of the Nile Valley in 1700 BCE. A lot of what Greeks learned from their African teachers, they allege as their own to the world. That's where Pythagoras comes from, and Herodotus, and all these Greeks who they did not want to identify the authorship of this knowledge they got. They started to make it their own. They started to whitewash the history. and they started to add their own legends to it, right? So it doesn't do us any good to paint Hercules black. No, we got to identify who Hercules is, who Hercules is plagiarizing.
Mm. Mm.
Romans, who ultimately followed suit in taking authorship of this knowledge, maintained the universities and institutes of African-derived knowledge in vast and fabled libraries up until the Dark Ages. A lot of that stuff was captured by the Roman Catholic Church, and it's still supposedly it's still in Rome, in the Vatican, and these underground protected libraries, right?
Okay.
5 centuries after the fall of Rome, Europe was plunged in the Dark Ages until civilization was reintroduced once again to Europe with another group of Black Africans, the Moors, brought the Dark Ages to an end. And we're going to talk about specifically how the Moors brought it to an end. And I know you're probably thinking, well, Yokana, we're supposed to be talking about where African Americans were prior to transatlantic slavery. I kind of have to go from the beginning to get us back to the end. Those two end points are gonna touch each other. All right. The end of this series is going to touch the beginning of transatlantic slavery, and you're going to see exactly how those two histories come about. All right. One of the most debated aspects of the Moors' history is their ethnic background. We live in a society where we are fascinated with who's white and who's Black. And that's why this slide has no color on it, except for that little yellow X in the top. But I make this slide black and white because I want it to pop out. All right? Were the Moors Black or white? The importance of understanding the Moors' historical significance goes beyond mere academic curiosity. It is a matter of acknowledging and appreciating the contributions of diverse cultures in shaping the world. That is why they being those who are opposed to the Moors being a certain color, they don't want to acknowledge or to just acquiesce to the fact that the Moors were ethnic, because they don't want to admit that a lot of what makes our modern world so cool and comfortable is contributions of African people. Who wants to hear every day, all day, that the people who you mistreated in America and on the continent during the partition of Africa and transatlantic slavery are the descendants of the people and the current people who have created traffic lights and refrigeration and the cell phone and the domestication of animals and airplanes and the plumbing system that we use in America and electricity. They had electricity back in Baghdad way back during the days of King David. It was called the Baghdad Battery. They were these Islamist extremists were going through ancient Babylon, breaking the idols that Nebuchadnezzar had built back when he was ruling in Babylon. And they went into this one place, and the ceiling collapsed. They were standing on it, and it collapsed, and they fell through. And when the dust settled, they saw in there clay pots that had copper cores in them. And they tested the residue that was on these copper cores, and they found out that it was citric juice or juice from citrus plants. And when electrophysicists recreated those things, what he discovered was they were using copper cores connected together in a citrus juice as an electrolyte to create electricity. So they had electricity in Babylon during the days of Daniel and the lion's den. If you are the kind of person that is empowered by racial or by ethnocentrism, that is not something that you want to hear. All right. By examining the Moors' origin, ethnicity, and influence on modern perceptions of race, we can better grasp the complexity of their legacy and its relevance in contemporary society. All right. And this was hard for me to swallow too, because I came into this research when I first started learning about the Moors, thinking to myself that the Moors were black and blackamoors, and that's why no, no, I was so wrong. I wanted so bad for the Moors to be black people. And I have this book by Stanley Lane Poole. Stanley
Mhm.
Lane Poole was a famous writer, historian about the Moors. And I don't know if you can see my screen or not. Yeah, I don't know if I have my thing open, but Stanley Lane Poole, he has a book called The Story of the Moors in Spain by Stanley Lane, Lane Poole, Poole. Um, and this book was written, I'm looking at it right now. This book was written back in, published in 1990. Okay, no, first published in 1886.
Mhm.
1886. And if you have YouTube, or if you have a like a book reading Kindle or Amazon Kindle, you can find this book by Stanley Lane Poole on Kindle or like an audio book, or there's a guy on YouTube who reads the entire book
Mm.
on YouTube for free, and you can read the book of the Moors in Spain. And I wanted to argue with him about the Moors not being a mixed race of people, but I was so wrong. I was so wrong. But
Mm.
we're going to get into that. I'm going to show you exactly what we are going to unveil. You're going to see it. All right. Questions? Any questions as I move on? If you have questions or comments, guys, you know how it works. Just interrupt me because I'll talk forever, and I want you guys to, ladies, to come in and say your piece.
The Moors in Spain.
Moors in Spain. Can you
King.
see my screen?
Bring it a little closer. I can see it. Hold on.
Moors in Spain. Let me open up my little thing here real quick to see. Okay, there we go. The Moors in Spain
Mhm.
by Stanley Lang Poole. Another good book that I would suggest if you are interested in doing research on the Moors is The Jews and Moors in Spain by Rabbi Joseph, and don't get me to say that last name. And this is a Jewish rabbi who's also a historian who wrote this book, The Jews and Moors in Spain. It's like green and light green. And this book was published as an essay. Uh, it's saying 1886, but I don't think that is when this was published.
Hmm.
This must have been published. But maybe it was. Maybe it was. He published it as a series of essays, and I don't see any other publication date on it. So I'm assuming as well 1800s. This was written 1887, 1885. I don't see any other dates on here, so let's go with
Hey,
that.
this is what I was thinking. It was
Yes, ma'am.
my mind. The Portuguese. How close is Portugal to Spain?
We're neighbors.
And that's where I know, even today, the Black Portuguese.
Like Portuguese, exactly. And so,
I don't know
um,
how migrated there or were always there or any of their history.
well, you're going to see, and maybe it's the next slide. I don't know. You're going to see that the Roman Empire was unique among empires. I saw a video a few months ago about like the empires in the classical world, and this guy, whoever made it, he had a map of Africa and Europe and Asia, and every empire he would draw, like he would color in the portion of the map that they occupied. And a lot of those empires kind of spilled over into North Africa or into Europe or over Turkey and, Iraq and Israel and everything else, Saudi Arabia. But the Roman Empire was unique among all of those empires because whereas those other empires were land empires that were surrounded by borders of sea, like the Mediterranean Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Roman Empire was different in that it was controlling the entire Mediterranean, and it was basically waters that were surrounded by a land border.
Mm.
All the other empires, they stopped at the sea and occupied the land to control that territory, whereas the Romans were different in that they sought to control the entire Mediterranean Sea. So when you read in the Bible, for instance, in the New Testament, the 7 churches of Galatia, right? Romans, Ephesians, Galatians, Philippians, Thessalonians, Romans, Corinthians, Ephesians, Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, right? These 7 churches of Galatia, these were communities of African Hebrews who had left Israel either during occupation or by immigration, and they were living in different parts of the Roman Empire. How did they get there? The same way John got to the Isle of Patmos, by sea, right? One of the nations that had been conquered by the Romans were the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were mighty seafarers. They built ships. And the Phoenicians were the ones who built the ships at Tarshish. And Tarshish is mentioned in the Bible as the ships of Tarshish, which brought gold ore and monkeys. One of the kings of Israel, I think it was Jehoiakim, King Jehoiakim, he had a navy that went around the world 3 times a year, bringing monkeys and bringing gold, the gold of Ophir, right? All of these things. King Solomon's navy, he had a merchant class navy that was sailing around the world, the Mediterranean, distributing all these different things to different ports. And so the Phoenicians and Jehoiakim and the Tarshish, which is way over there in Spain, this was part of the journey that lots of people took that were Roman citizens. Even Cornelius was said to be of the Italian band. Cornelius was a devout African Hebrew who was a citizen of Rome, who even held a job in the Roman government. The same way you might find a Hebrew Israelite today that is in the military, or that is a police officer, or that might be, I have a friend who's running for a county office, right? So he was a Hebrew Israelite of African descent who had a occupation in the Roman government as a centurion. So we just have to know that these people, in the context of the Bible is focused on one nation family, which is the Hebrews, right? And although these people might be citizens of Rome or called Greeks or Hellenes, the Bible is specifically talking about one nation family, which is the Hebrews. Oh, there we go. So here we have the map of the Roman Empire. Look, Spain is Tarshish, right? Macedonia, this is where Alexander the Greek comes from. So a lot of the Greek-speaking Hebrews, they were living here in Greece, right? Asia Minor, this is where a lot of the churches were, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippi, Thessalonica, right? All of these places. But all of this was part of the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. They were the only one that tried to rule the Mediterranean. And this was called the world. So when you read when you read in the Bible that Jesus was carrying his cross and they had to get Simon of Cyrene to go and carry the cross for him. Cyrene was the capital city of Carthage. So Simon, and everybody says in the Bible, oh, Simon was black, he was from Africa, he was African, he was Cyrenian. Although when you look at the movie Passion of Christ, they chose the most yellow black man they could find to portray him. But he lived way over here. Why was Simon of Cyrene? Why was he in Israel at the time? The Bible says that every year, 3 times a year, all of your able-bodied men had to report to Jerusalem to keep the Passover. So Simon was a Cyrenian out of Carthage who had made the trek across either by land or by sea. By sea was a lot easier. By land or by sea to Israel to keep the Passover in accordance with Hebrew laws and Hebrew customs. Right here, Damascus is where the Phoenicians were, right? We know that Jonah was swallowed in the belly of a fish out at sea. Where was he at? He was in the Mediterranean Sea.
Okay.
These things happen in the Mediterranean. So if you're looking at this map of the Roman Empire, when the Romans finally brought an end to the Jewish state or the Hebrew state in 70 AD, 3 things happened. Thing one, the Roman Titus, Vespasian is his name. Vespasian, the king or the emperor of Rome at the time of the sacking of Jerusalem. Vespasian either sold the Hebrews into slavery, or he crucified them, or he let them flee into other parts of. So let's back up. So right here in Israel, you have what's called the Fertile Crescent. And Rome had this giant army that was made up of soldiers from different regiments. He had Syrian soldier regiment. He had a Hebrew regiment of soldiers. He had a Gallic regiment of soldiers. He had wherever Rome went, they would conscript those tribes that they conquered into their military. And the way they had to feed that military was with food, with grain. And that's where the Fertile Crescent comes in, because it's even today, that is where Europe gets all of its food from, because they grow all of the food that goes to Europe in Israel. So don't wonder that you shouldn't wonder why the Europeans now, today in 2024, why they won't condemn Israel, or why they won't say that Israel is killing Hamas civilians. Why is it that every time you cut on the news and you look at the Israeli conflict, they say, doesn't Israel have the right to defend itself? They are saying that because if they condemn Israel, Israel will stop selling them or trading with them all of the food in Israel that they grow and they send into Europe. I have been to Israel. I have seen the thousands and thousands of hectares, not acres, hectares of land where they're growing food that never stays in Israel. They are growing the food that they are the breadbasket of Europe. So the Europeans are never going to talk down on the Israelis for what they're doing to the Palestinians, because if they do, Israel can stop bringing them the food that they need to survive. All right. So Vespasian, the Roman Empire, needed that land, and so they had to contend with those Hebrews, but Hebrews were very hard to rule over because we did not allow anyone to rule over us that was not of our own kind. And so at some point, with all the rebellions and uprisings, and you can imagine Rome is trying to conduct wars at the extremities of its empire against the Gauls, or maybe this tribe of Visigoths is in unrest, and we got to go march way over there to fight them. And then the Persians want to invade from Asia, or some African tribe wants to come in. So Rome was busy trying to maintain its empire and having to come back to Israel and squash this rebellion or uprising from these childish, violent, volatile Hebrews. Rome was sick of that. And they were like, you know what? We're going to go in there right now, and I'm going to put an end to all of this. And so when they went into Israel to destroy the Hebrew state, they scattered a lot of the Hebrews into different parts of the empire. Questions?
No, interesting.
I'm here looking in this book here. It's called From Babylon to Timbuktu.
Mm-hmm.
It's another book that you can find on YouTube for free. All right. It says here, I don't know where I want to start reading this from. Let me see. The Moorish Empire. Well,
That's not
the place it's not.
Williams. Who's the writer?
The writer is Rudolph R. Windsor. Rudolph R. Windsor, Windsor.
Hold on.
Let me see if I can find. He talks about the explosive. It's too much information in this book for me to really go through all of it. But he talks about the Moors and the Phoenicians and everything else. I want to say, there's a part in this book where he talks about how the Romans did the Hebrews. And he says something along the lines of, there were so many, when Rome went into, when the Romans finally brought it into the Hebrew state, there were so many Jews or Hebrews in the slave markets that the markets were full of Hebrews, and they were trying to disperse them. They were taking Hebrews and they were selling them for cheap all over the territory of Rome. And you're looking at the map of Rome. They were selling them for cheap all over the territory of Rome because they were so sick of the uprisings and everything else going on in Israel. And this is how a lot of these Jews or Hebrews got scattered into other parts of Asia, other parts of the Roman Empire. They had to spread them out. They had to spread them out to keep them from uprising. And they sold a lot of them into captivity. And he also says that according to the historian Josephus, whom we talked about, Josephus is a first account witness of the sacking of Jerusalem. He was one of the few Jews that was allowed to stay in Jerusalem. He accounts that you could go down some of these roads that the Romans built roads. You could go down some of these roads and you would see 500 to 1,000 crosses with Hebrews being crucified on the crosses. And this is also how the Bible explains what Jesus said, right? That the temple will be destroyed and there will be a great crying in the land. I'm still looking for that part here. I don't know where it is. Okay, in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son, Antiochus Epiphanes, and you know what I did? I know I have a copy of that book right here somewhere. Give me 1 second. From Babylon to Timbuktu, PDF for free. You guys see that? From Babylon to Timbuktu, PDF free. Now I'm working on a work laptop, so it kind of blocks some of my downloads ability, but I had it somewhere. Let me see. Let's just keep going how we're going. I'm gonna find it. Kind of blocks some of my download ability. There we go. So I'm gonna be on page 84. Let's see if I can find page 84 real quick.
Oh, wow.
That's 61, so we're almost there. 73. Let's go to 81, 84. All right. So this chapter is called uh, Black Civilizations in Africa, the North African Black Jews, right? And I'm reading it from right here. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state. I'm going to put that back in the proper context, and I'm going to say Hebrew because it was a Hebrew state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people, talking about the Hebrews. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Hebrews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of Black Hebrew slaves. And the Lord shall scatter thee among people from the one end of the earth even to the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, even wood and stone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This prophecy and all the residue of the prophecies contained in Deuteronomy befell the Black Hebrews after they disobeyed the laws of God. Many nations transported the Jews into slavery, and the sons of Israel transmigrated to every continent. Right? He says 1 million Jews or in Libya and Egypt, from the borders of Ethiopia. Talking about the prophet Isaiah, Zephaniah, who says, "From beyond the rivers of Babylon, my suppliants shall bring my offering." Right? There was a period of over 600 years between Zephaniah and Philo. And considering the new waves of immigrants coming into Africa, they had 600 years to penetrate toward all the borders of Ethiopia. Hebrewism was as detectable by its inscriptions from the Egyptian border westward across North Africa to Mauritania, which is right there below Morocco and Spain, right? It is certain that the Jews had migrated all across North Africa by the 2nd century. Some scholars fix the date earlier than this. All right, so he goes on concerning the Jews of Cyrene, which was Libya, right, which is where Simon of Cyrene comes from. All right, so this chapter here, if you guys can find this book on it's a free PDF. This chapter here is very informative on that. I'm gonna leave that right there, and I'm gonna go to another source real quick right here, which we talked about, right? It says, B'nai Ephraim, the children of Ephraim, right, or Africa from Nigeria, live among the Yoruba nationalities. And we know that Yoruba comes from the Hebrew word Yeroboam, and Yeroboam, look at the root word, Yeroboam. Yeroboam or Jeroboam was one of the Ephraimites, descendants of Ephraim that ruled the northern kingdom when the kingdom split in two in the days after King Solomon. The northern kingdom was ruled by the tribe of Ephraim ruler Jeroboam, and that's where the Yoruba get their name from, Jeroboam. Their oral history tells that B'nai Ephraim people came from Morocco after the Hebrews were banished from the Iberian Peninsula sometime after 1492, which is, as we saw in the PowerPoint, the 15th century, right? Let's skip down. Thousands of Black refugee Hebrews of Spain, of the Iberian Peninsula, resettled in the environment of Lagos and Porto Novo, as well as Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau. This is why I like Traore, right? I always say, when I grow up, I want to be Ibrahim Traore. And I said my class, if you don't know who Ibrahim Traore is, then you just don't know history. Check your pulse. Make sure you're still alive. If you don't know who Ibrahim Traore is, he's the guy who overthrew the French colonizers of his country in West Africa and became the youngest African ruler ever in modern history. He's like 35 now, 35 years old. And in Sao Tome, they were slaves. Some eventually made it deeper inland and became assimilated into one nationality or the other. All right, jump down a little bit more. This set of Moorish Hebrews are not to be confused with more ancient Hebrew and Canaanite tribes that we know as Bantu that have been living in Nigeria and other African countries for thousands of years. The Bantu people come from ancient Hebrew and Canaanite tribes. The B'nai Ephraim, the ones that came from Morocco during the Spanish Inquisition, the B'nai Ephraim did not settle with the Yoruba by accident or chance. They had recalled that a body of their people had departed Canaan in ancient times and had settled in present-day Yoruba areas of Nigeria, just like their own group, B'nai Ephraim. So when it happened that they had to leave Spain or Iberia because of the Spanish Inquisition in a hurry to protect their lives and freedom, those Moorish Iberian Jews from Spain sailed on their network of ships into Nigeria near Lagos, among other Yorubas, their relation by blood, their greater nationality. All right.
Right.
It says, on the current slide, it says here, it is important to understand that the Moors were not definitively dark-skinned African descended people. Rather, the populations which contributed to the identification included an ethnically diverse mixture of people who fomented the region. This requires a further explanation. So I'm going to explain this a little further. All right. Invasion of the sons of Noah. All right. Keep in mind the map of the Roman Empire that we saw on the previous slide. Question?
About Hannibal, is it too early or does he come later? And was he a Moor with those elephants?
So Hannibal was the king of Carthage. Now, don't let this idea of him being a king confuse you. He was a king, but he was also under tribute to the Roman Empire.
Okay.
Okay? And Hannibal was an African general, although when you watch the modern movies of Hannibal, they always show him as a European, right? Because they don't want you to see that these Africans were giving those Europeans a run for their money, right? Hannibal was an African. He was also a Jew or a Hebrew. Hannibal was a Hebrew. And this is the book here. If you can see it, it's called The Punic Wars.
Thank you.
All right. Now, when we talk about etymology and we talk about how words change over time, the word Punic is spelled Punic.
Okay.
Right? So the word Phoenician is also spelled Fe, Noon, and Gath. Phoenician. So Punic and Phoenician are the same word. Although one is anglicized. Punic is anglicized. And you remember we talked about how the Latin suffixes were added to words. So if you add I-O-U-S, you have Phoenicius. And so Punic and Phoenicia are the same word. So he was a Phoenician. And the reason why they want him to be European all the time is because he was the one. Look how close Tarshish, which is Spain. Look how close. This is also the Iberian Peninsula and also called Al-Andalus. When I did my DNA showed that I was my DNA showed that I was a Nilotic, which is from the Nile River. And it also said that I was Spanish. Al-Andalus is what it says. I have actual Moorish blood in my DNA profile. So the Phoenicians here, Carthage, the same place that Simon of Cyrene came from, who helped carry Jesus' cross, right? These were Black people. But the fall of Carthage happened in 160 something BC during the Maccabean period. Maybe he was part of that Maccabean revolt. I'm just speculating. Maybe he was part of that Maccabean revolt. And he was crushed, he was killed, he was overthrown by this man named Scipio Africanus. He was given the name Africanus because of how he defeated Hannibal. And he could not defeat Hannibal outright. He had to use subterfuge by signing a peace treaty and then killing Hannibal in his sleep.
Oh.
Yeah. Hannibal had gotten old. He had been in all those wars. I think Hannibal was not even in the First Punic War because it happened over a course of like over 100 years. But he decided that he was going because he had elephants. There were elephants in North Africa before the Romans created that desert that we now call the Sahara. There are caves in parts of North Africa with hieroglyphs and with paintings on the wall showing trees and jungle and animals that are now extinct, like the unicorn, the one-horned rhinoceros, right? That are extinct now that lived in North Africa. Man, we can connect all these dots. Even in the book I have here called The Punic Wars, what do you see in that book? It's an elephant.
Okay.
One of the reasons why, and see, the movie 300 came out where the Persians were using rhinoceri to fight the Spartans. That's all been glamorized and glorified, but it wasn't the Persians who used elephants first. It was Africans because that's where the elephants came from.
Yes.
They used elephants. There were no rhinoceri in Persia. There are elephants in Persia, but there are no rhinoceros in Persia. Where do those rhinoceros come from? They had to come from Africa.
Yes.
Go to Israel, there's ostriches, there's jackals, there's hyenas. David fought lions. These are African animals in Israel. African plants. Israel is sitting on the African tectonic plate. You know, this is an African place. One of the things I want to do this year, they have this thing every year in Houston called the Afro Fest, where all of the different countries of Africa come together and they have this big day where they do all these music and food and everything, culture, and they never have Israel present in the among the tents. And so this year, I'm going to talk with the organizer of the event, and I'm going to put a tent out there for Israel because we forget that Israel is part of Africa. But that's neither here nor there. Tamara, you have a question? Is your hand up?
Yes, Noble Yochanan, you mentioned that the Romans created the Sahara Desert. Could
Yes,
you
ma'am.
elaborate on that, please?
Mm.
So as I was saying, there are paintings and hieroglyphic art, and even in literature. There's even literature dating back to the time of Rome and after, where you can where the people who did these things are clearly describing jungle environment in the Sahara.
Mm.
Interestingly enough, the countries that border the sub-Saharan countries in Africa that border the Sahara Desert, they have created a coalition where they are trying to replant trees along that border of the Sahara because the Sahara Desert is expanding. It's a process called desertification.
Mm.
Desertification. And the desert is expanding. And the Sahara Desert, if you look at any of the Nat Geo shows about deserts, they'll tell you that the Sahara Desert, although it is one of the biggest deserts on the planet, is also the newest desert on the planet. The oldest desert is the one in Namibia. The most expansive desert is, I believe, the one in, or the driest desert is the one in Australia. But the newest one, the youngest one, is the Sahara Desert. And so, through a process of removing the trees,
Mhm.
Rome had to build roads. Rome had to expand their empire. They needed chariots. They needed weaponry. They needed salt. They needed all of these things that come out of North Africa, and they had to find a way of getting it from North Africa, which is the extreme edge of their empire, into the parts of their empire that were more populated. And they did this with ships. What did they make the ships out of?
Wood.
So here you have
Timber.
houses, ships, weaponry, wagons, chariots, all of these things being made of wood. Where are you going to source that wood from?
Mhm.
It doesn't grow in this part of the world because Europe is cold. Do you know what keeps Europe from freezing?
No.
The North Atlantic current.
Mm.
So when you go to Africa, let's say we're going to Africa to get slaves. We're going to sail down to Africa to get slaves from the slave coast, Nigeria, Biafra, right? Then once we load up with cargo, we're going to sail across to the New World. Do you know what we look for when we get out to the open water? We look for the North Atlantic current. The North Atlantic current is this movement of water that quells up from the deep ocean. And the African continent brings this current up along the west coast of Africa, and then it goes across almost the surface of the water. And it's a straight highway from the west coast of Africa right into the Caribbean. You don't even have to open your sails in order to sail from the west coast of Africa into the Bahamas because the North Atlantic current will carry you that way.
Mhm.
If you ever watch the movie Finding Nemo, there's another current. I forget what it's called, but the characters in the movie Finding Nemo, they use that current with the sea turtles to get to Australia in that movie. And so
I
once the North
remember.
Atlantic current, which is warm water, right? Because that's the same current that the hurricanes form. Why do the hurricanes always go into the Caribbean and the Florida and the Gulf of Mexico? Because they are getting their energy from that warm water with the North Atlantic current. You gather? And
Yes.
so when that warm water that creates the hurricanes that carries those ships across the Atlantic, when it gets to the Caribbean, that water turns into a warm wind, right? The water evaporates, it turns to a warm wind. And that warm wind goes back across the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, and it goes right into Spain and the Alps. And that's why Spain is so nice because it gets all of that hot air that starts as the warm water right there in the coast of Biafra in West Africa.
Mm.
And so because Spain is nice, but the rest of Europe struggles with cold temperatures because of the mountains like the Alps and the Pyrenees that keep that warm air from going into France and Germany. And that's why those places can be so cold during the wintertime, because Spain is hogging all the hot air. And so because these areas in north of Europe are so cold, trees don't grow there. Now you'll get conifer trees like the pine trees, right? But conifers are not good for making houses. They want to use deciduous trees to make houses, like cedar, oak, and um, what was the tree that they use to gopher, right? Those trees are African trees. And so the Romans had to source those trees for all of the parts of their empire from North Africa. And, it just creates a snowball effect where you create this depression. And as it grows over the 1,000 years of their empire, as it grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, they created this thing called the Sahara Desert. Did I explain that enough? Was that too much?
No, it
Okay.
wasn't.
No, it wasn't too much.
Oh, wow. Okay. Um, I just wanted to be, as articulate as possible about that, because the Sahara Desert was created during the times of the Roman Empire and I mean, imagine how many people are in this land at this time, and wood and timber is like the number one resource.
Mm.
There is no wood and timber in Europe because Europe is cold, it's frozen. All right. Let's read this. It says, invasion of the sons of Noah, the Mediterranean coast of North Africa. In classical history, North Africa ceased being inhabited exclusively by indigenous dark-skinned tribes, even in the days of ancient Egypt. Egypt was an access point where many cultures converged. From the east came Scythians, which is people from Iran, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians. From the north came Etruscans, which later became known as the Romans, and other Germanic tribes, including the Gauls, Celtic people, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Macedonians, and Greeks. From the Near East, Egypt saw Phoenicians, Canaanites, and Hebrews, and from the south, there was an influx of innumerable Hamitic peoples. Egypt was the first access point for all of the sons of Noah. Okay. So that's why it was that's why it was such a point of that's why Egypt was thriving so much, because you have all these different people coming in. They're bringing in their culture, they're bringing in their oral and written history, they're bringing in sciences, religion, politics. That's why Egypt was so powerful as a nation, because they had so many different people that could contribute to the genus of, or the hegemony of the country.
Imagine the
Maria,
trade.
Yes, ma'am.
back to Egypt again. Those hieroglyphics, or not so much the hieroglyphics, but the paintings in some of the tombs, aren't they a mixture of colors of people? I remember seeing different shades of black, brown, yellows.
Yes, they
in that.
are.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So again, the composite of different people that were living during those times.
Right. Right. It was a mixture of all kinds of people that were called Egyptian. And if you remember during the days of Joseph and the prophecy of Egypt, remember the 7 cows, the 7
Yeah.
skinny cows ate the fat cows. What had happened? It was a famine in the land, and the people started to sell their cattle. They started to sell their gold. They started to sell everything. And finally, they're like, hey, you can just take our bodies, just feed us. And so all these people started coming into Egypt because Joseph had stored up the grain. And so everybody was going into Egypt to survive this famine.
Yes.
So even in the days of Joseph, Egypt, North Africa had stopped being just black people. Even if the Egyptians were black, there were so many people that were in Egypt, it just wasn't black anymore.
Okay.
Right? The Ottoman Turks and the spread of Islam. Immediately after, and perhaps because of the destabilization of the Roman Empire. So when the Roman Empire was strong and it held the Mediterranean, everything was okay. But as soon as the empire fell, it paved the way, or it cleared the way for the spread of the Mohammedan Empire. They had no resistance going into North Africa. All right. Uh, Over the next 1,000 years, the region of North Africa and the Mediterranean moved to the ebb and flow of invading empire after invading empire, of conquering dynasties one after the other. This disorder and chaos manifesting in Europe as an age of darkness, or the Dark Ages, feudalism, cleared a path for the spread of a new religious dogma, come to be known as Islam. At first, Islam was a religion of shamans and idolaters, right? But because of the Hebrews and the Hebrew writings of monotheistic gods, or of a monotheistic approach, right? The religion of Islam soon organized and proliferated the Arabian Peninsula before spreading into Egypt and interior parts of East Africa. So it was the spread of the Mohammedan Empire that brought stability to North Africa. And because it was so many people from ancient Egypt to the compository of the Roman Empire, all those different people that are all pulling together there, those collective people, as they started to convert to Islam, that is where the Moor or the Moorish identity came from. It was a mixture of hundreds of different kinds of people that became known as Moors, not just Black Africans, but also the Persians, Arabians, Europeans from the Roman Empire, and just Hebrews, Africans, Egyptians, the northern tribes of the Assyrians and Germanic tribes, Macedonians and Greeks. I mean, it was Phoenician. It was so many different types of people in that region that began converting to Islam that we cannot definitively call the Moors one race or another. It was a compository of different people. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Is there a meaning that you've come across for the name Moors?
So there is a Latin word called moronos,
Moronos.
which means dark skin,
Okay.
right? Now, is that a reference to the texture of the people? Or it means dark, it means brown. Or is that a twist on the word Dark Ages? We don't know. What we can say definitively is the Moors were a mixture of colors. And that mixing of the colors, if you were to mix all the colors together, it wouldn't turn white. It would turn a shade of brown. Does that make sense? And you know, the driving force behind the Moorish expansion was the spread of Islam. These were Arabians who were dark-skinned, and later on the Ottoman Turks who were more of a lighter hue or a sandier hue, but they were not European, they were not white European, which could be another reason why they were called dark or brown, because of their complexion. But just because you're dark skinned or just because you're not European complexion doesn't mean that you're African. You know what I'm saying? And so we're not really arguing so much that the Moors were a certain shade, but people want to say that Moors were African. And the history the history disproves that. The Moors included some Africans, but the Moors were a composite of many different cultures.
Torah.
Okay. So here we have that same region of North Africa. It says the Golden Age. The Golden Age is a reference to the time when the Mohammedan Empire was spreading its influence and everything was, there was an explosion of art and science in North Africa and religion and everything was going on in North Africa. This explosion is what the Golden Age is talking about. United nomadic people formed into a more unified culture, creating a common currency, making Arabic the official language, and standardizing measurements. This led to a golden age. Science, math, astronomy, medicine, and literature flourished. Libraries and schools were built, and arts and architecture thrived. This period lasted until the start of the Spanish Inquisition in the 12th century, in the 13th century. And you see where it goes into Spain. These Moors came into Spain like Spanish Jews, right? Or Spanish Hebrews, Moroccan Hebrews. They came into Europe, and Europe at this time was in the Dark Ages until they found the Renaissance. Who brought the Renaissance to Europe? It was the same golden age that happened in North Africa. These Moors went into Europe and they saw that these people did not know how to bathe. They did not know how to preserve food. A very interesting fact on the side note is Rome had this giant army. Let's go back to the Roman map real quick. Rome had this giant army that they had to feed, and they would conscript these tribes that they had conquered into their army. And also, if you were poor, you could join the army because Rome had a professional army, meaning it was their profession, and they would pay you to be in the army. So, what do you pay poor people? What is the one thing poor people need?
Food.
Food, right? So since poor people need food, guess what you do? You pay them in salt because salt is how you preserve food. Well, the Latin word for salt is sal, S-A-L. And in the Roman world, when you will pay somebody in salt, you would call it a salar. S-A-L-A-I-R-E, salar. Guess what?
Salari.
That's where you get the word salary.
Yes.
Hey, language is undeniable.
I love it.
Tamara, you have a question?
I do. It might be a little bit off, but since we're talking about the expansion of Islam and I think from Arabia. Now I've heard it said that the Arabs are also Hebrews, and then there's the idea of Ishmaelites and the Hagarites. Can you unpack that, please?
Sure. So there are, as you say, there are more than just Hebrew Israelites. And this is why it's important that we use the term Hebrew Israelites, because history will try and confuse you by calling them Jews. Jewish people are Europeans. They come from Germany, they come from Czech Republic, they come from Russia, Poland, Belarus, Ukraine. That's where they come from. And they practice a religion called Judaism, which is why we call them Jews or Jewish. And they intend to make their religion an ethnic group. And Jewish is not an ethnic group, it is a religion. Give you an example. I'm gonna get to your point. I'm gonna give you an example. Chinese is an ethnic group. Everybody can't be Chinese. But Buddhism is the religion of China. anybody can convert and become a Buddhist, but you can't convert and become Chinese. So Judaism is a religion. Anybody can be a Jew, but Judaism is a religion practiced by Germans, practiced by Ukrainians, practiced by Polish people, practiced by French people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They want to make it an ethnic group, but it's not, because they are not of one ethnic group. When they went to Israel in 1947, they spoke hundreds of different languages. And it was Ben Gurion who came together with some Hebrew scholars, actual Hebrew language scholars, and created that one unified language that they taught in the public schools for a generation to get people to a point where everybody was using the same language. So there are different ethnic groups that make up this composite called Jewish. Now, to your question, when we exclude, when we cut the fat off the meat, the fat is these Jewish people that are trying to make something of nothing. What you have left is you have people who are actually Hebrews. And the Israelites were not the only ones. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. So the Israelites were not the only Hebrews. Let's go through them. Abraham, Genesis 14 and 13, was called the first Hebrew. All right? Abraham had two sons, Ishmael, which is where the Hebrew Ishmaelites come from. Because why? Ishmael practiced the same practice of his father. He practiced the same customs of his father. His descendants practiced the same customs of Abraham. So even though they were not the children of promise, they were still Hebrew. They were Hebrew Ishmaelites. Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, and Esau. So now you have Jacob and Esau practice the religion or the customs of Isaac. Isaac practiced the customs of Abraham. Abraham was a Hebrew. So Esau or Edom, his descendants became Hebrew Edomites. That's where Job comes from. That's where Josephus comes from. That's where Herod comes from. If you remember in the Bible, when the Assyrians removed the Hebrews out of Jerusalem and put some foreigners there, Yah sent lions to slay the people because they didn't know the customs. And so what they did, the Assyrians went to some Hebrew Edomites and brought them into the land to teach the customs of the people to the people of the land. And that's how Herod was there during the days of Jesus. Herod was an Edomite. He was an Edomite by blood who was familiar with the ways of the Hebrews, and therefore Yah did not destroy the people, but he was a Hebrew Edomite. That's also why the Bible says, do not abhor an Edomite, because that is your brother. So now we have Hebrew Ishmaelites, we have Hebrew Edomites, and we have Hebrew Israelites. Israel is the one who got the promise. So we are Hebrew Israelites, but we're not finished. Noah also had a nephew named Lot. And from Lot came the Ammonites and the Moabites. And Yah protected the Ammonites and the Moabites because Yah had a covenant with Lot. And so you also have Hebrew Ammonites and Hebrew Moabites. But the promise, the covenant, Romans chapter 9, verse 4. I could wish myself for a curse from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the covenants and the promises and the giving of the law and the service of God and the promises. So the promise goes to the Hebrew Israelites, but no, we were not the only Hebrews. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Toda.
All right. I want to make sure I answer the question. Let's see. Immediately after, and perhaps because of the destabilization and fall of the Roman Empire, Africa and the Mediterranean moved into the ebb and flow of invading empire after invading empire. Disorder and chaos manifesting in Europe as the Age of Darkness and feudalism, cleared a path for the spread of a new religion called Islam. And first, the religion of shamans and idolaters, Islam soon organized and proliferated the Arabian Peninsula and spread into parts of East Africa. Okay, we talked about this as well. This period of the Golden Age lasted until the 12th century. It spread so far, even here, it says where this yellow is, this is where like the Songhai and the Akan and the Nigerians that practice Islam, they stem from this area of the Islamic spread in North Africa. And we're going to talk about that in our part 3, which is talking about the dispersion. Okay. So then we go into which I didn't finish the slide. I'm terrible. But Hasdai Ibn Shaprut is a Hebrew Israelite from Israel. He's a Hebrew Israelite who lived as a Moor in Spain. But I'm not gonna talk about him right now. We did that. This is Hasdai Ibn Shaprut, right? He was a Hebrew, born about 915 in Spain, died in 970. Andalusia, which is Al-Andalus, Spain, was a Jewish scholar, physician, diplomat, and patron of science. His father was a wealthy and learned Hebrew of Jain. Hasdai acquired in his youth a thorough knowledge of Hebrew, Arabic, and Latin, and later was known as clergy in Spain. So I'm just showing you him to show you that there were plenty of different Hebrew Israelites that were among the Moors living in North Africa and in Europe that brought all of this wealth of knowledge and Golden Age, Renaissance type of learning to Europe before the Spanish Inquisition happened. Okay, another one says the Moors are North African, and they have had the Moors. So the Moors are North Africans, and they have extensive knowledge of ancient Egypt and Nubia, which was fostered from constant cultural exchanges between Africans and the Northwest and North Africa. So because all these people were coming together in Egypt and in Rome and so forth, the Mohammedan Empire, there was a cultural exchange going on constantly. They introduced science, literature, and other forms of knowledge to Europe that lifted it out of the Dark Ages when they conquered the Iberian Peninsula in 711. The Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, then known as Al-Andalus, which is what Andalusia comes from, which is what it says in my genealogy report, right? Thrived as the center of art and culture. It was esteemed for its scientific advancements and economic prosperity. The Moors existed and ruled in Europe for over 700 years, from the 8th century to the 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed. The end of that being the Spanish Inquisition, right? This is a discussion about the presence of Black people in Scotland, in England. This is where I told my friends where Scottish Rite Freemasonry comes from Africans who were Moors who lived in Europe. So the whole branch of Masonry that people try and demonize, people always demonize Masonry, or Freemasonry. Freemasonry is an African expression that was given to Europe by African Moors. And that's why within Freemasonry, there's a lot of Bible history, there's a lot of Hebrew history. The entire Royal Arch degree is about the temple and the building of the Second Temple. So it's a lot of Hebrew Israelite stuff, even in Freemasonry, which you hear Scottish Rite Freemasonry, right? And there's also a Moorish Rite of Freemasonry, right? Ireland, England, and Wales before 1492, before the 1500, right? At this present aim to gain some insights on some Black individuals that lived and visited England or the UK before this period. So the heart of this is just that this cultural exchange lifted Europe out of the Dark Ages when the Moors came to rule the Iberian Peninsula in 711 AD. I'm going fast here, but this is just another person that was a Moor who was famous in Spain. I want to jump to this is a guy, Solomon. He was a Freemason. Angelo Solomon. He was born in the 1700s. The first Moorish Freemason, and it goes into how he came from. Look at this. The horse was a beautiful Andalusian mare. So he lived in Spain, right? He's also was in Austria and Vienna, which is Central Europe. He was born of Cameroon in the Congo, which makes him a Negro or Niger Congo area, right? And he goes into where did I see it? It says something in here about how he went into Europe and Scotland, where he built lodges. And I'm gonna keep scrolling down. Maybe on the video, when I post the video, somebody will be able to catch it and read it for themselves. I don't know where it is anymore. Okay, Moorish Rite, pursue Masonic, blah, blah, blah. I'm looking for, all right, I don't know where it is on here, but it's somewhere where he talks about how he went into Europe and into Scotland specifically. Angelo, the imperial race of Numids, a man of beautiful blah blah, Sicily, Africa, England, the Frank Islands, Austria, and the House of the Princes. It says it somewhere specifically where he was in Scotland, and that's where the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry comes from. And what the Europeans did, of course, is they took this ancient Moorish rite of Freemasonry and they anglicized it to make it white because they could not stand having a black man or a Negro be the author of their order, and they could not stand that he was a black man. This is also where you get the history of King James being a black Moor in Scotland, because King James was also Scottish, and he was involved heavily in the translation of the King James Bible, and supposedly he was a black Moorish Scotland person. King James himself was. James being the anglicized version of the Hebrew name Jacob, right?
Okay.
James and Jacob are the same name. I don't know where polyglot means he spoke different languages. He was a non-European genius. I don't know where it is on here, but it's okay. But anyway, I just wanted to bring it out there because we try to give Europeans credit for the fraternity Freemasonry, and Freemasonry was introduced to Europe by this black African Congolese Moor named Angelo Solomon. Okay, let's move along. What happened to the Moors? This is another part here of the story. Did the Moors take over Spain? The Moors from North Africa helped the First Islamic Empire. What happened to the Moors during the reconstruction of the Iberian Peninsula, right, in Morocco and Morocco in 1492? They were kicked out of Spain by the Spanish. It was called the Spanish Inquisition. There's Al-Andalus again. Let me just keep going. The Inquisition was originally intended primarily to identify heretics among those who converted from Judaism and Islam to Catholicism. See, here's Ferdinand and Isabella, where they at? Isabella and Ferdinand, they they did not want Spain and Portugal to be known as a land of Black Jews. And so they forced everybody to convert from Judaism and Islam to Catholicism. And anyone who would not convert, the regulation of the faith of newly converted Catholics was intensified following the royal decree issued in 1492 and 1502, ordering Hebrews and Muslims, Moors, to convert to Catholicism or leave Spain, resulting in hundreds of thousands of forced conversions, the persecution of converts and Moriscos, Moors, and the mass expulsion of Jews and Muslims from Spain, which is where we get to this set of Moorish refugees should not be confused, right? So this is where thousands of Black Jews of Iberia resettled in Lagos and Porto Novo. So before we were before we were turned into slaves and taken from the west coast of Africa, we were the ones in Europe and North Africa known collectively as the Moors, who had been expelled out of Spain and Al-Andalus, and we had to go into Africa where they knew where to come get us. They knew where to come get us.
Wow.
They knew that they knew that we were going to go to Nigeria, where the greater portion of our people were, and they came there to come get us. They came there to come get us. Now, let's see. This is the Spanish Inquisition. We're gonna skip that. We're out of time, but I want to show you one last thing before we go. I want to show you one last thing. The United States and Morocco have a treaty. Now, Morocco is the first country to recognize the United States as a country, right? It's called the United States-Moroccan Treaty of Friendship. It was signed in 1787. And at the time, it still stands today. It is the oldest treaty between two countries in modern history. It's the oldest and the longest standing. Now, look what it says here. The treaty, let me see if I can find the actual treaty. All right, the treaty, I'm gonna go to 13. Let me see. I'm trying to find in this treaty where it talks about the Moors. Was it 16? This treaty is still on the books today. And in this treaty, it literally says the word Moors, because the American government and the Kingdom of Morocco knew that there were Moors living in America before Columbus got here. And it was a Black Moor who showed Columbus how to get to the Americas. And one of those tribes of Black Moors was called the Blackfeet Indians. And they called them Blackfeet because they were Black. They were here, 21. If a citizen of the United States shall kill or wound a Moor, or on the contrary, if a Moor shall kill or wound a citizen of the United States, the law of the country shall take place, and equal justice shall be rendered the consul assisting at the trial. And if any delinquent shall make his escape, the consul shall not be answerable for him in any manner whatever. So America knew that there were indigenous Moors in America before before they brought slaves here. They knew it. And this is the treaty between Morocco and the United States that is still active today. It's the oldest standing treaty between two countries in modern history, and it talks about the Moors. And they gave the Moors, you can read it for yourself, they gave the Moors special privilege because these people were here before the country of America was established. So when you hear these Black folks on YouTube talking about sovereignty and indigenous, guess what? What they're saying is not without merit.
Okay.
Yeah. First time I've heard the Blackfeet referenced.
Yeah.
That's in my heritage.
Yeah. Let me show you a picture I hope I have it on my Facebook page. I go to Facebook for a lot of these things. Let me see, photos, your photos. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Um, hopefully I can find it. I'm looking for a picture of my grand, my great grandmother. My great grandmother was a Blackfoot Indian on my mother's side, was a Blackfoot Indian. She was 6 foot tall. She was straight Indian. She had long hair, and when she was elderly, she had to go live with my grandmother. And my mom was a girl at the time. This was in the 50s and 60s. And what happened was, um, my mother remembers, my mother was one of 14. And so all 14 of her brothers and sisters that were living at the house, when their grandmother, my great grandmother, was living there, they each had a job to do. One of the jobs was, for instance, my Aunt Betty had to bathe her. My mom's job was to braid her hair. And she said she had long salt and pepper hair that was straight jet black at one time, but it was long salt and pepper. It reached down to the floor. And my mom would part it down the middle and braid it into two big braids and roll them up like Princess Leia before there was a Princess Leia. And when she died, and my grandmother contacted the Blackfoot Nation after her death, they came to my mother's house where she was living, and they went into the backyard with her body, and they did an Indian seance in the
Wow.
backyard. And the people, the neighbors were so afraid, they called the police. And somebody was actually able to pull the police report from 1950s where they had wrote a report about this Indian seance going on in the backyard. That was the term they used, Indian seance. I don't know where to go and look for it now. I think if I go to Horn Family Tribe, it might be here. Let's see. Let's see if I can find it. That's my uncle. Oh, here we go, right there. Great grandma Paralee Dobbs holding my uncle Jimmy. And this is the brother, my uncle, that was right above. My mother was number 10, he's number 9. So my mother wasn't probably even born in this picture. And you can see this tall, deep set eyes. She was described as a tall, black, Indian Negro woman of Blackfoot stock.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Questions? Anybody have any questions? Anybody have any anything they want to talk about before we go? We are well past. I promised this wasn't going to be a 2-hour lesson, but we are well past that.
It's worth it. It was worth it, but no questions from me.
Any questions from anybody out there? This video will be recorded. It's a recording, so it'll be on the thing. So let's do this. If there are no questions,
It'll be where? The recording will be where?
I'll post it on YouTube, and I'll also share it to the Glory to the Righteous group.
Okay.
That way you can see it, you can find it.
Yeah.
But-
Carolyn, did you have a question? I think you're muted.
Hi, yes, not a question, but just a comment. I just want to say thank you so much, Noble Yochanan. It's been very insightful, very
Yes,
deep,
ma'am.
and very revelatory. I've learned a lot and gleaned a lot from this session today. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Went to the call, Dr. Carolyn. I do appreciate it.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Mm.
Well, if there's nothing else, I'm gonna lower the arc and then we can be dismissed. If you will, humble your spirits. Alehagish Hagivot. Shuva Yahuwah. Revolt Afe Israel. Hallelujah.
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 Hallelujah. Well, I appreciate everybody for coming on to the call. I know we went over a little bit. I'm sorry about that. But I hope I was able to share something with you that you can take with you. And I'll definitely will let you know when the video is posted to YouTube, and you can definitely get on YouTube and watch it and view it and share it.
Wonderful. Todoroba.
And
Hola.
shalom, shalom, Mahithra.
Shalom, Lahibroad.